Hi, this is podcasting consultant Jason Van Orden with just a short program to explain to you what is podcasting. Just want to break it down into the least technical terms and kind of give you a view of how does this process work, both from the side of somebody subscribing to a podcast as well as somebody publishing a podcast. So, of course, we need to start where we talk about, well, what exactly is a podcast? Well, really at the most basic, a podcast is nothing more than a portable digital content of some sort, a portable digital content file that you put on the internet for consumption. And this is usually serial in nature, meaning it's some kind of show that you're putting up maybe every week or every other week or every day or something like that. And then it's published, most likely published through a feed for subscription. Of course, this feed technology you've probably heard about, I'll be talking about more, is kind of what made podcasting popular at first. But really what's most important is the content, and that consumers want relevant, on-demand digital content in the form of audio and video, the most common. But did you know you can actually also podcast PDF files? So really it's just any kind of digital content, probably serial content that's published through a feed or for consumption online that people can download and take with them. It's published using a blog usually. It can be published using a blog. This is the method that I suggest using for publishing your podcast just because it makes it really easy and offers you lots of promotional advantages. And it can also be syndicated through directories such as portals and iTunes. I mean, this is the point of the feed, is that by publishing it through what's called a podcast feed, people can subscribe to that and directories can watch your feed, and everybody automatically gets, when you post a new episode, all the directories get the latest information and post it to their directories. All your listeners get the latest episode, and everything is automatically updated. So that's what we're talking about when we say syndication through the feed out to people who've subscribed and to directories. I should make it clear at this point that subscribing to podcasts for the most part is free. There are a few that charge to subscribe to them, but for the vast majority of podcasts are offered to subscribe to them is free of charge. Okay, well, a feed, let's talk about what is a podcast feed. A feed is really nothing more than a special kind of text file with some very specific information about your podcast in it. It contains information such as the title, it contains the description, and a list of the episodes, starting with the most recent first. It also has a web address on the internet. This is what we call the feed address. And so this text file lives on your site and has a web address where podcatchers or feed readers such as Google Reader, such as iTunes, can read the address. This isn't actually an address that your average user would go and visit because, as you'll see here in a second, it's just kind of some gibberish in a text file. But special kinds of feed readers can watch this feed file and get the latest updates. So what is the anatomy of a podcast feed file without actually looking at the text file yet? Well, up at the top, like I said, it's going to have some basic information such as the title, the author, and the description. So for my podcast, Podcasting Underground, it would list the name, my name as the author, and a brief description such as this is podcasting tips for podcasters. And then it's going to have a list of the episodes with the first episode or the most recent episode at the top. Episode 25 would be one of my most recent listener questions answered. And then you'll see right here there's an address that's listed for where the MP3 file lives. And this is how iTunes or Google Reader know where to go and download the MP3 file because it's listed inside of the podcast feed. And then a brief description that we sometimes call the show notes that tells what the episode is about. Down below that is just a list of the rest of the episodes as far back as I decide I want to have in my feed. And then when I decide to post a new episode, everything is shifted down and the new episode is inserted at the top like this. This is what it actually looks like if you were to look at this text file. It's not pretty. It's written in a bunch of code. If you look here closely, you will see stuff like title, Podcasting Underground, Podcasting Tips for Podcasters, and you'll see a link to the site, and you see description, podcasting tips that you can put into action right away to help you succeed as a podcaster. So that information is in here, but in a very specific format. The good news is you do not have to know how to read this format, to write this format, or prepare the feed file at all. There's some very easy ways easy ways for creating your own feed. As I suggested before, a blog is a great way to publish your podcast. I like using the WordPress software that you can download at wordpress.org. This is an example of one of my podcasts, of the Podcasting Underground, that I run using a WordPress blog. And when I post a new update to this blog, the feed is automatically updated in the background. Another service you might want to check out is feedburner.com, which adds a lot of extra stats and other nice features for a podcast feed. This is a free service that's now owned by Google. All right, let's take a look at how this process works from the side of the listener. So here we've got our happy listener who goes out on the internet to find content that interests him. So he downloads iTunes, which is just one of the media players that you can use to listen to podcasts, and they have a directory built into the iTunes player. He goes out on the internet and he finds my podcast, The Podcasting Underground, and decides he would like to subscribe. So he looks for a subscribe button or looks for the feed address. And my feed address for this podcast is podcastingunderground.com/feed. So that's where the feed text file lives. And he puts this address by subscribing. When he subscribes, that feed address is put into iTunes. So iTunes now knows that he wants to get all the latest content as I post it to this feed. iTunes immediately goes out and sees that episode 26 is the latest episode. So this episode is downloaded right away for him to listen to. Then iTunes keeps checking the feed until eventually it sees that I post a new episode. And at this point, when it sees that, it downloads that episode as well, allowing him to, if he wants to, sync it to his iPod or whatever other MP3 player he might have. Of course, you don't need an iPod and you don't need iTunes. Whatever media player will do for consuming podcasts. And I just want to remind you again at this point that subscribing to podcasts for the most part is free. There's usually not a charge to subscribe. So that's how it works on the side of the listener or subscriber. Now let's look on the side of the podcaster. The podcaster sits down and sits at his mic and decides he's going to record his podcast on frogs. This creates a raw audio file, probably in the form of a WAV file, a WAV file, or something like that on his computer. Unfortunately, this file right here is much too large to upload to the internet. If you were to put this on the internet, it'd be a couple hundred megabytes or more possibly, and that's just too large for people to download and put onto their media player and to manage in that way. So we crunch the file down to MP3, that format that we're very familiar with when it comes to having our music files and things like that. And the MP3 file is maybe as small as a tenth of the size of this original file, allowing it to be much more manageable. So now this MP3 audio file we can upload to our web host where we are hosting our podcast. Now the MP3 file, once it's on the web host, we go and update our blog. So we log into our blog software, type in the title of our episode and a few notes about it. In this episode, we talk about et cetera, et cetera. This is what we call the show notes, which are posted to our blog along with a link to the MP3. When we publish this episode, behind the scenes, WordPress updates that ugly code feed file we were looking at earlier and inserts the new information about the new episode, including a link to the MP3 file so that all the podcatchers and subscribers and directories see where this new episode lives, and all of our subscribers will automatically get that MP3 file downloaded to their computer for them to listen to it at whatever time or however they wish. So that's kind of the basic overview of how this podcasting process works. If you'd like some more information, you can check out my free podcast tutorial site at howtocreateapodcast.com. This is Jason Van Orden. I'll see you around the internet.